Okay, boom. And we are live. We've been already live streaming for a bit on D Live and forgot to hit record. So just hit record. We're diving deep into Lyme disease today and basically the effects and the history of it and our take on it, as well as a personal journey that Dr. Barre Lando had with the disease. We were kind of going into the history of it and the conspiracies related around Plum Island and where Lyme was officially kind of first diagnosed in Lyme, Connecticut, which was across from Plum Island. And we were talking about films under our skin, which really has a lot of amazing information related to this, as well as another interesting documentary that I believe came out in 2009 that just documents a lot more examples of government and military experimentation on humans related to ticks and different pathogens and bacteria. And that's called Under the Eight Ball. And that was about the Fort Detrick, Maryland, eight ball experiments, which I guess was like a 4-story round building that they used where they actually experimented on children. So that's a really interesting documentary. But yeah, there was, we were talking about some of the more mainstream articles that try to counter the concept that Lyme disease was manufactured or it was a genetic bioweapon. And one of the examples that, or one of the stories that was told is by about a Reverend Dr. John Walker in 1764, who on the island of Jura supposedly discovered Lyme, and that is actually in Scotland. And I did a little bit more research and found that it was actually a subcutaneous worm that caused the paralysis. I wasn't able to find much more information just on a kind of a quick little scan, but I'm sure there's plenty of documentation about that. There's also a number of other articles I saw that claims that, you know, Lyme goes back thousands of years. I mean, we are talking about a bacteria strain here. I believe there's a number of different bacteria strain of the, was it Borrelia? Is that how you pronounce it?
Yeah.
Spirochete, I believe. And there's like the Borrelia burgdorferi, the Borrelia myoni, which are in the United States. And there's other ones that have been found around the world. So these are bacteria that cause these issues. I guess the question is, how are, you know, why did we not have a more, if this is true, that it's been around for thousands of years, where's the documentation besides, you know, a guy on a reverend doctor on an island in Scotland in 1764? Why all of a sudden do we have a mass epidemic starting in the 70s where they're saying now 400,000 people in the US a year are officially documented with the disease. And we know there's a lot of diagnosis, as well as you know, the way the numbers work. A lot of people probably don't know they have Lyme disease. I actually think it's probably double that at least. Was saying earlier, I think pretty much everybody I know has at least a friend or a family member that's been afflicted by Lyme. So yeah, today we want to kind of dive a little bit into our theories behind Lyme disease and some techniques and tactics that those who are suffering from the debilitating disease can hopefully start to look into, and primarily just kind of go into some of the theories and stuff behind the way all this stuff works. And, you know, I'm more of a technician and a researcher. I'm not a doctor or biologist, so I by no means am any kind of official expert on this, but because you have had personal experience with contracting Lyme and were able to essentially alleviate yourself of the symptoms and hopefully, you know, any bacteria left in your system, you know, and we can kind of dive into what is the bacteria, what is, you know, the current definition of Lyme, and how is, you know, a lot of the misconceptions about it, because I know there's a lot out there. And this is kind of more in your terrain, Dr. Lando, than mine. Where do you think we should pick up from here? We could go more into the conspiracy of it, your ideas of how it relates to experimentation, weaponization, There was a really interesting article too I was reading on, it's a site called Public Health Alert, and it's the creation of Lyme disease on Plum Island, the logic of claims. And it's one of the first ones Google gives you when you first dial into looking up Plum Island and Lyme disease. And it seems like they have a definite agenda here to disprove the connection. While it is pretty, I mean, the article does seem to be pretty down the middle and kind of exploratory in whether or not this was a biological agent created by the government, by the military to afflict either an enemy or the general populace. And their main, I guess, hypothesis is that they discount it because they say that the bacteria predates, or the spirochete, if I'm saying that right, predates Plum Island by thousands of years. And then they go on to say that why would the military try to create a weapon that doesn't necessarily immediately terminate the enemy? And it just seems like they kind of have a very surface level look at this. But it is, of course, one of the top ones that Google gives you. And I guess one of the things, too, a lot of people have challenges with is understanding really what government is and what the military is in regards to them being corporations and not and heavily fractured and heavily isolated. And once you kind of dive into that concept, it starts to make more sense on how these things can be done. It's not because it's much more complex of a structure than most people like to think of it. But yeah, Barre, where do you think where do you want to take this right now? There's a lot of ways we can go.
Why don't we start with the origins? I mean, there's so many levels of this. There's ample evidence that it is bioengineered. And the problem now is there's so many bioengineered organisms that have mutated who knows how many billions of times that it's hard to classify any of these things now. There's also mycoplasma organisms that mimic a lot of what we would think of as classic Lymes and just a whole biological soup out there. But a lot of these manufactured organisms or diseases, for instance, like AIDS, there's absolutely zero doubt that that's a manufactured illness. And then they take a harmless retrovirus, HIV, and, because you always need a boogeyman to blame things on. And so they blame it on HIV. That's another whole discussion. We won't go there right now. But
I was going to say that's you just open up a can of worms there. Yeah.
But the point I'm making is if you understand how they do these things, and if you're a medic with background in genetics and biological sciences, you can actually go into years back of journals, standard medical journals, New England Journal of Medicine, and so forth, and look at different research. And in research, it's not like you have these evil, mad scientists, coming out of college that are saying, I'm going to create things to, inflict humanity. But what you do have is a lot of brilliant people that are compartmentalized and given grants and all the research facilities and equipment that they need in order to create one little piece of the puzzle. And then they're all sequestered off into different places and they never get to connect the dots. Well, the thing is, a lot of them have been connecting the dots in the last couple of decades. And some of these biological researchers have actually been quite disturbed when they realize that, well, I actually worked on that piece of the puzzle, and they're seeing how, that created, some of these organisms that were then used as weapons. And when they try to become whistleblowers, then they, usually meet untimely deaths, like committing suicide by killing yourself, shooting yourself in the back of the head 9 times or something. or drowning in 1 inch of water, on your morning jog. In fact, over the last, at least 2 decades, there's, by a lot of accounts, there's over 300 biological researchers worldwide that have all been mysteriously disappeared or suicided. And so this is a real thing. So you can't tell me it's a conspiracy theory. These are facts. And again, when you read the journals and have the ability to do that, you can yourself, in hindsight, now that we know more about these afflictions, you can even see reported in these journals. And if you can extrapolate what you're reading, you see that, wow, that was actually a piece of this whole engineering product. But of course, you don't get all the information in one spot. So unless you know a lot, you're really not going to know what you're reading or understand it. That was part of a larger agenda, for instance, such as Lyme's. Now, the one thing that there seems to be good evidence for, back to Lyme specifically, is that, being a spirochete like syphilis, the engineering and research into the development of Lyme's began back in the 50s when they were purposely injecting male members of the black population with syphilis, unbeknownst to them, of course. And, that was the beginning of, experimenting on live people to begin the whole process. I don't know how far down the road they were back then, but that's definitely implemented in how they learned more about this spirochete. And then from that spirochete, created a special engineered form that would operate in stealth. In other words, evade your own immune defenses and detection, which is what makes Lyme's disease so problematic. And I've treated a lot of cases of it, and all successfully, because the conventional treatments, of course, is you do IV antibiotics and things that will further, it might knock down bacteria in short term and keep symptoms at bay, or at least a certain less intense level. But what you're doing is degrading the ecosystem to such an extent that in the long run, you're more vulnerable and more dependent on just doing more of the same. So, not giving medical advice, but if it was, myself or a loved one, the last thing I do is start, antibiotic therapy, because there's a lot of other options at work. And we can talk more about those sorts of things, and that will strengthen your internal ecology, and also, give you the ability to not have any residuals in the future. So I kind of tell people I have a PhD in Lyme's, not because I've treated a lot of people with it and learned a lot about it by treating other people, because I contracted it myself. When I was about 15 years ago. I was, I guess, in my mid 50s back then. And I was still very athletic, carrying a little bit more muscular weight, and, doing 440 workouts down on the track and benching in the 300s, and, actively kickboxing and things, just good shape for that time of life. And then I got a mosquito bite. And what people don't understand is these things are airborne now.
And to be clear, you were not on the East Coast. You were.
No, I was in Santa Barbara, California. And the mosquito bite on my right thigh, just didn't quite go away, and it created that classic little bullseye thing that you see on the internet when you look at pictures of tick bites, that are Lyme's implemented. But I didn't think anything of it back then, because I was still in the mindset that, ticks were the only way you get it. I thought, well, that's kind of an odd reaction for a mosquito bite, but I just didn't make the connection. About a week later, I got violently ill one night. It was actually 4th of July. We were over doing a barbecue at some friend's house, and I got up in the middle of the night, and then I was just seemed like the worst case of flu I ever had in my life. And And I usually don't catch that kind of stuff. So that was kind of strange, but got over it in about a week, and I was just kind of wiped out, and drove up north about a week later when I was pretty recovered. And then all of a sudden I started getting double vision, and I was worried about, geez, can I even drive home? And anyway, that was the beginning of a 2-year nightmare. And some of the symptoms I experienced along the way, what happens is these little spirochetes secrete neurotoxins, so it attacks your nervous system. So, you can start having muscle wasting and all sorts of paralysis issues and other things, facial muscles that wouldn't work if I talked for too long repeatedly or just trying to eat something. I had to kind of take a break to let the juice come back into the muscles. There's times where a whole side of my body would just peter out, where I, couldn't even walk. I'd be on the beach or something. I lost my sight to the point where it was just kind of like a blur. Now, you had these periods of remission every couple of weeks where they kind of go underground again. And then when you're feeling good, you just feel like you have a good case of the flu, but at least your muscles function and things. And then it's very discouraging because you feel like, oh, okay, I think I might be getting over whatever the heck this is. And then boom, it hits you again. And then, you go through that for months or years, and it really takes the wind out of your sails. And interestingly, I kept practicing. There was times where I had to, take a day off from work or just fake it with my clients, where I sometimes couldn't even see them, but just sort of act normal. And I had ways of getting through the day and actually still doing my work, because I had a pretty steady stream of clients coming in, and, people with all sorts of things. And I didn't want to, call it quits on them. But in that time, I also had a lot of people with Lyme's. And even in the local area there, interestingly, there was a whole rash of breakouts of people, that I, in proximity to me, where I heard about it, as people having very similar symptoms. So that was kind of odd in the fact that it was airborne. And I was able to connect the dots, obviously, after I had these symptoms for a while and reconnect it back to the mosquito bite, and, because it all happened right then. So, yeah, it's definitely engineered. A lot of these things that we're being subjected to, everything from chemtrailing, that has a high, a proportionate amount of neurotoxins that we're exposed to that way, the microwaves that affect our nervous system, the engineered bugs that affect our nervous system. Somebody somewhere really thought it would be a great idea if you could attack the herds with neurotoxins of all types, including this kind of biological weaponry. So anyway, I did get through it. I learned a lot, not just with my own, but working with other people and learning protocols that were very successful, because a number of my clients that came in specifically for that, they had been to many other practitioners, including the conventional system and the antibiotics. And some of these people, and the interesting thing is the far majority of the people with this were all otherwise healthy people like myself that had never been sick a day in their lives. And it seems to, get people, that are in really tough condition. And
were these people
athletes.
were the mosquito bites too, or were they ticks, or all different, or do you remember?
Oh, well, some people, in fact, a lot had no idea of or even awareness that they had a bite or any kind of insect bite. So in fact, it's very rare that they'd come in and say, oh, I got a tick bite. They just come in with the symptoms. So who knows how they got it. And it would seem to me that if it was a tick bite, that's pretty, I mean, that's not going to detect or escape detection.
Yeah.
We live in tick country, and my dog, tick season in the spring, I'm picking these things off my dog all the time. And, they're pretty hard to miss. So I would think that
they grow quickly. We have had my youngest son we call him the tick magnet, unfortunately. And yeah, there was one time where, and he kind of is really good at ignoring things. He's just kind of a total boy, you know, doesn't care if he's messy or dirty or whatever. And he was kind of scratching his head. This was about a year and a half ago. And we finally checked out the bottom of his scalp here, and there was a massive tick under his hair that had blown up. They blow up pretty quickly because they're sucking the blood into them. They blow up like a balloon, so it's hard to miss, even though they're tiny at first. And then, of course, we had to pull them out, and then we were going to send it in actually just to have it tested. But in California, there's a lot less chance that you'll contract Lyme. And we just watched him, and he's gotten like 3 or 4 since. And now we are very, very cautious with him. We do tick checks whenever we come in. And it's kind of interesting here where we live, the tick season seems to be actually more in the winter into early spring. Yeah, it's scary. It's funny when you read some of these articles and they're saying, what's the sense of creating this when it, doesn't have immediate effects if it's a biological, form of weaponry. However, think about it, how insidious it is to use something like ticks to spread a biological weapon. I mean, they're tiny, and they are in the one place where populations would go to hide from potential enemies or to get away from, think about history, Revolutionary War, the guerrilla warfare. What do? You go hide in the forest. So now you go to be a survivalist. Where you going? You're going in the forest. You're going to go get food or fish. Where are you doing? You're going in the forest. Now you go in the forest, and you got to be covered head to toe for fear of contracting this biological weapon. So it makes a lot of sense to me, and it's also super debilitating. So on the profit side of it, is if you go down that route of some dark corporate agenda, in the same vein as AIDS or cancer, it's just like a big moneymaker too. So dark stuff. I hate talking about it, but it is a reality. And kind of going back to, and real quick too, I forgot to mention this. There's a new book out. It's called Bitten, The Secret History of Lyme Disease and Biological Weapons. It's by Chris Newby. I'm going to order it. Came out in May 2019, so it's very new. It's a riveting thriller reminiscent of The Hot Zone. This true story dives into the mystery surrounding one of the most controversial misdiagnosed conditions of our time, Lyme disease, and of Willy Bergdorfer, the man who discovered the microbe behind it, revealing his secret role in developing bug-borne biological weapons and raising terrifying questions about the genesis of the epidemic of tick-borne diseases affecting millions of Americans today. And this is in The Guardian. They talk about how Bergdorfer, who died in 2014, worked as a bioweapons researcher for the U.S. military, and said he was tasked with breeding fleas, ticks, mosquitoes, and other blood-sucking insects, and infecting them with pathogens that caused human diseases. According to the book, there were programs to drop weaponized ticks and other bugs from the air, and that uninfected bugs were released in residential areas in the U.S. to trace how they spread. This is documented. It suggests that such a scheme could have gone awry and led to the eruption of Lyme disease in the U.S. in the 1960s, 70s. So there you go. Maybe you happened to unfortunately be in Carpinteria when they decided to drop this on a small population.
Your
crazy
tax
stuff.
dollars at work.
What's that?
Said there's your tax dollars at work.
Going to the corporation.
You made a comment about government. I mean, I don't want to go down that one, but what we have to understand is government is not what we think it is. It's not our original republic. This is a private corporation doing business as U.S. Inc., capital U.S. It's different than our original organic government that was initiated with our founding forefathers. And they warned us about all this. So if people have any disbelief, like, oh, how can our government do this? Well, just like spirochetes being engineered to operate in stealth mode, this new corporatized government, well, not corporatized, it is a corporation, called US Inc. And you can look up its tax ID number and find out, all its incorporation papers through Delaware and so forth historically, and when and how it did that. But it is operating in stealth and masquerading as our government. But these are private interests that have one intention, that is to control the whole planet. And they believe it is their prerogative, believe it or not, to cull the herds and manage the population in any way they see fit. And just look up the root of the word government, and it means to govern the mind, to control the mind. Government literally means mind control. It's a big psyop. And we could go forever. You don't need us to tell you about it. I mean, if people don't know about all this or yet, then, I don't know where you've been hiding. But if you want more details about it, then you can fill in all the blanks. That's not our intention or our job here. But what we do need is to have an educated population, and our audience probably is already there. Otherwise, they wouldn't be listening to us today. Because if you don't know what we're dealing with, then you'll never believe that this is possible, that they would engineer these little creatures and use them as weapons, because you're still under the impression that the government is here to help us. Well, it's not. That's not who they are. That's not their job. They do not represent you. This is not a representative government. You have signed adhesion contracts without you knowing it, that has given them the authority to inflict their will upon you. And then when you don't obey their rules, which they call statutory, legal statutes, which shouldn't be considered law, then you get thrown in jail or worse. And the reason why is not because you broke law, it's because you're in breach of contract. So people really need to understand what we're dealing with. And when you understand that level, and when you end that denial, then you can start to delve into, back to Lyme's disease, why people would do this to their fellow human beings, and what they gained from it. You have to say, okay, who would benefit from something like this? Well, there is ample information that will explain all of that to you. And then when you have all those facts, then you can, get over it and join the rest of us that are well beyond that stage and just working purposely for solution. Myself, I have helped a lot of Lyme's people who thought their life was over, and even very young, healthy people that had just given up and lost all hope. And within a matter of weeks and months, they're better, and they never have any, they never have to look back again. So we all do our little part. Mike, you're out there, just not only informing yourself, but educating others. We're hoping that this modest podcast, which will grow over time, will help just help us reach that critical mass where all we need is a small percentage of people. Just like 200 years ago, there's only 3% of the people that finally had the gumption to stand up to a very ominous force, the British Empire. At that time, which, by the way, behind the scenes is still calling the shots, another rabbit hole to jump down. But anyway, that 3% of the people actually turned it around, created history. And because of that, everything that we have enjoyed in this country for the last 200 years is because of those brave people. Well, we need more now. And so everybody has to do their little part. And that's what this is all about. So spirochetes are really, as far as I can see, a genetically manipulated version of syphilis that began with the experimentation on, at that time, the black population in the 50s, and it grew to the point where they had these organisms ready to go off the coast of Connecticut. Now, whether they deliberately introduced them to insects, or somehow it just got out of the lab somehow, and happened organically with insects becoming carriers. I don't know. That's speculation. But what's not speculation is that it happened, and then it was carried by deer became that were carrying these ticks on their bodies, and then swam to the mainland Connecticut, and then it spread from there. And it seems like it's a good trail that's more than circumstantial, as far as how this whole thing got started. But for anybody out there that's listening and has had this, there are solutions. We can talk more about that. I'll let you kind of guide the narrative, Mike, but we can get more into that. And I can tell you, what I did on my own body. It took 2 years. I'm a little peculiar in that even though I treat people and have very advanced bioterrain training and a very eclectic background in conventional and alternative medicine, if you want to call it that, I have a very precise way of diagnosing, treating, and having a great deal of success, which is why a lot of people of Lyme's came to me. But when it comes to my own body, I'm kind of old school. I was brought up with if you hurt yourself, just rub some dirt on it. And I was an old, jock in the combative arts, and you just kind of always in denial of injuries and that kind of stuff, and you tough it out. So I don't take all the medicines and do all the things that I, help other people with. And when it came to Lyme's, it was the same thing. I just, to me, it's kind of mind over matter, and I'd get over it. But this little bugger kind of took me to my knees, and took a while. And I can get real personal and tell you how I finally beat it, but let's just maybe save that for last if you want to talk about it at all. So, yeah, Mike, where do we go?
I think probably the most valuable aspect, besides the little nuggets here, we're talking about the incorporation of stuff, which, you say everyone should know that, but God, most people don't. In fact, I'm looking right now at the state of Delaware incorporation doc, and there's one here from 1933, 7/12/1933, the Internal Revenue Tax and Audit Service, Inc. Was made. That's a corporation, so the IRS. You've got the Federal Land Acquisitions Corp. You've got the Central Intelligence Authority, Inc. 1983. You've got the United States of America, Inc. right here as well. Pretty wild, all in the state of Delaware. But
yeah, they're all Inc.
Yeah, everything's
they're all incorporated. They're all doing business. They've bought up every municipality, county, state. Whenever you see state of versus, like for instance, California versus state of California. I'm in Del Norte County. Now, county of Del Norte. Whenever you see of, that's a corporation.
Yeah.
And that means that is not your tax dollars at work. That means those are revenuers collecting money, bilking you of your hard-earned money with property taxes, excise taxes, state taxes, federal income tax. That they have no authority to collect that other than that you've given them permission. Then when you don't fess up on any particular year or try to, shove a little stuff under the rug because you can't pay them what they really want without starving yourself, then they get you for breach of contract, and they throw you in one of their little cages.
Well, to be clear, they don't get you breach of contract. They get your straw man, which is what was created when you get a birth certificate.
Well, yeah.
Correct? So this is more information most people don't know about, is that you, in this contract that you are set up with when you get a social security number and a birth certificate, is actually a straw man, or like literally a fictitious business name that you act under. And there's actually there's things that you can do to declare your sovereignty as an individual and not as a citizen. We can go, that's like a whole other long podcast. And there's actually, there's so really good YouTube videos and documentation out there. And I still want to do a resources page. We'll probably do it once we get the private co-op set up. We'll have a really cool resources page with all this kind of documentation and stuff to help folks dive into this. I mean, this is stuff I still want to do. And we've talked
And
about
and understanding words is very important. Corporation, it's corpse, it's a dead body, it's not a
yes.
living entity. And so, and it's a fiction. So a dead body cannot communicate or let alone have authority over a living sentient being. So what they have to do, US Inc., in order to communicate and to create a nexus of authority over a sentient being, they have to create another corpse, which is your name by way of your birth certificate, as you said, in all capital letters, another corporation. And then they dupe you into thinking that that's you. And then you agree to become the surety for that. And so when these two corpses are doing business and stiffing each other with debt, and one calls themselves the creditor and the other the debtor, which is always you, then you get that little thing in the mail and you go, oh, geez, I owe this amount of money. Well, you have to sever that nexus. There's a way to do that. And, this sounds way far-fetched or far offline from healthcare, but as a health practitioner, I went down this road because if you delve deeply into real medicine, not just conventional medicine that has really reduced the human body to a mechanical, materialistic being, and in medical schools now they teach us in a way where it takes the spirit, the essence out of the individual, out of the collective, and reduces us to these mechanical parts. So real medicine gets into not only that, you have to know that, but you also integrate an understanding of the essence, the soul of the individual, the collective spirit of humanity. And on that level, then you treat the whole being. And so because that was my orientation in medicine, because of my eclectic training and training from all over the world, not just from the US, it became apparent to me that a lot of afflictions that I was seeing, all these cancers and things, were because on a real soul level, people were not even aware that they had any say about things. They fell into complete victim consciousness when they got the diagnosis, and they didn't believe they had any power or ability to draw their line in the sand, so to speak, and on that important soul level, and just not allow the contrived energetics that have been weaponized against humanity to have their way with their life, and especially their bodies. And when you just think more holistically, and myself as a practitioner, and I look around and I say, well, okay, these diseases are mirroring much deeper belief systems and directives within the psyche. And it doesn't take a genius to look around and say, well, we're told what to do, what we can't do. You have adults, very successful, intelligent adults that, every, April 15th, they're jumping through these hoops. And every time an agency or a code department or whatever comes to your doorstep, or you get a letter in the mail, you get knock-kneed and start trembling like this piece of paper is going to reach out and strangle you or something, And so if you have that kind of fear, and if you have subjugated yourself so thoroughly to these fictions and think, or to a disease process, and not even understand that you have the capacity to turn around anything, including Lyme's, which is how I did it, then these diseases are going to be much more prevalent. And it's we can talk about we're being sprayed like bugs and we're subjected to all these poisons, and there's great truth to all that. But the fact is it all starts because we have relinquished our own individual identities, our authorities, to these fictions outside of ourselves, and let them have their way with us. to the point where we are not using our own will force. So when I, just started connecting those dots and realized, even in homeopathy, we talk about miasms and how they're basically a product of entire civilizations, collectives of humanity that have succumbed at some historical point to belief systems, and then that outpictures, as manifest in their culture, in their bodies, and so forth. And then those miasms, are passed down genetically and through through times generationally, and then they become the root cause of all the diseases that we know of. And so when you have that background, then you look outside and see how we've just given up on ourselves. And then, that's why I said, okay, maybe I ought to start looking at how these people in so-called authority because anybody that's clear thinking is going to know this isn't right. Nobody has the right to tell somebody else what to do. And contrary to what we've been taught, humanity is not necessarily evil or bad. And left on our own device, we would not be making war with each other. And actually, right now, at this very moment, there's much more love and peace existing on the planet, than what we read about in the news by far. But they keep us in a state of fear and disbelief in the goodness of the average person by staging shootings and wars and all the like, where they keep us in this mindset. So what we have to do is understand that the power is within us. But first we have to understand how, just on the very rudimentary, mundane level in our everyday life, we've given away that authority to people outside of ourselves. And if you don't know the truth of our money system, our tax system, about our government, about agencies, and how the whole game is rigged, then you're not going to stand a chance. And if you don't believe that all of that is in fact true, then you're not going to be able to understand the next level of reality of how this plays out within this, reality simulation matrix, whatever you want to call it, which gets into another whole discussion on why that is in fact true. So you have to take yourself incrementally from ground level, find out how everything works, in the old mystery schools where the people would achieve a certain level of knowledge, and then they were invited into deeper circles where they would get taught, the next level of understanding. It was mandatory that you had to study law, you had to study finances, you had to study the way of government and politics, because they knew that if you didn't understand that level of how we're manipulated on this plane, you would never be able to go the next level of applying true spiritual practices and things that would free you up on other levels. So that's why a holistic doctor like myself, you can go on my library shelf and you can see, uniform commercial code books and law books and all that kind of thing. And every single page is tabbed and underlined and memorized. And it's because I realized, no, it's not anything that I would in a million years care to study, because it's horrible, boring fiction. On the other hand, it's better than being a victim of it. But the good news is people like myself that, in decades past went down that road and, figured a lot of these things out. Now the next generation can draft us and just watch things on YouTube, get caught up, and not have to go through all the years of trial and error, and also taking a lot of arrows in our back. I mean, some of us have been targeted, myself included, by certain agencies and harmed greatly.
I was just going to say,
but different story.
Yeah, I was just going to say
that was before YouTube censorship, by the way. Sorry, go ahead, Mike.
Well, I was just going to say that very thing. Thank God that we've got, all the hard work that the previous generations have done now is on the web. And you're right, the YouTube censorship's scary, but we've got blockchain and we've got new stuff like DLive, thank God. But just go watch like some Manly P. Hall lectures on YouTube. And he'll, I love listening to him because he's like, just has this stream of consciousness. And he was one of the great, 20th century U.S. I don't even call him a mystic, just a um, extremely knowledgeable and wise individual who came from the mystery schools and brought it to light and just explains all this stuff in a way that really makes a lot of sense. So I highly recommend Manly P. Hall if you haven't tapped into him. But yeah, to your point, you medical your health relates to your subconscious psyche, and if you are under a constant form of subconscious stress because you believe in the fictional uh, matrix that you're in, that you're subjugated in, then you're going to be under a lot of stress continually, and breaking down your immunity and all that and that's in a very just kind of like simplistic way of saying it. But yeah, your health relates to your wisdom and your awakening, definitely. And the more awake you are, the more in line you'll be with being happy and being vibrant and having a understanding that you are the master of your own reality. I think that's the most important thing to really take in is trust in yourself, trust in your heart, in your own wisdom, as a ever infinite consciousness. And not to get too out there and woo woo, but it's always those simple mystical things, going to love and going into your heart, and not getting so caught up in your mind, in your brain, and in the things that are constantly being driven into us through mainstream media and all that. So that being said, to tie back into Lyme and with these notions as a really fundamental groundwork for what you did as far as kind of overcoming the symptoms and things you had when you contracted Lyme, I think it would be good to kind of dive into some very just, I guess, pragmatic or actual techniques, things you did to help you alleviate yourself from this terrible disease. And do we call it a disease, or we call it, what's the appropriate terminology for Lyme?
I would call it poison delivered via insect, just through an insect medium. So, you get poisoned in many ways, and what they created was the ability to deliver a neurotoxin with an insect.
Yeah. So I would
So it's poisoning.
then you're dealing with a lot of detoxification then.
Well, you have to eradicate the organism so that you don't get, hatchings periodically that usually they go in 2-week cycles that keep, a fresh new batch of little creatures secreting these neurotoxins in your bloodstream. So you have to get rid of them. You really do. And that's twofold. You need to build your own immunity, not to be confused with vaccination. Immunization and vaccination are two different things. You have to build up your immunity, and also you have to take some allopathic measures in order to kill the little buggers. And when I say allopathic, that means you are deliberately targeting an offending agent, whether it's a chemical substance or a microbe or a bug, in order to wage war on it. Now, if you're going to do warfare, there actually is a time and place. If you go back far enough before all of these things were, created, you didn't have to do that. You would just manage the internal terrain and let nature take its course. And we had everything within inside of ourselves to fix anything, as long as we knew how to bring ourselves back into balance and understand how we got there in the first place. But with these outside agents that we're breathing and, getting injected with vaccines and, getting infected via bug bites and things, it does require that we take a more active role outside of just managing the ecology. But, you still have to manage your own ecology, because if you're out of balance, it's going to make it very hard for you to get better. So you have to do a combination of good natural medicine where you understand how to restore balance, and then at the same time wage war, but do it in a way where there's no collateral damage. Now, when you take antibiotics and a lot of conventional therapies, you're looking at a lot of collateral damage, just like our government, like Madeleine Albright saying, "Oh yeah, it's probably worth it that we had to kill a bunch of kids over there when we bombed Iraq, but it was worth it." That kind of thing. Well, that's pretty barbaric, and that's exactly what we do in our bodies with chemo, with antibiotics, and so forth. We go in, we wage war, and instead of doing it intelligently and selectively, we just kill everybody. And that's what conventional medicine does, because they just don't know better. At least at the level of the clinic, they don't know better, because that's all they've been taught. And they've also been taught that if you hear anything else, it's BS, because it doesn't exist, because we're the smartest people in the world, have the most money to put into our institutions and research. So therefore, this is the only place where you're ever going to get truth, which is why the average medical doctor is in disbelief whenever they, get wind of, some kind of alternative cure. And of course, you can't use the cure word, because what the medical system has done is they have literally put patents on all these diseases. So it's not just that, oh, you're practicing medicine without a license. They've literally, copyrighted the word cancer. So if you say, oh, I'm treating cancer, you're in copyright infringement. And again, it's the legal game, going back to what we said before. They get you on legalities and breaches of contract and that sort of thing, encroachment on private patented intellectual property. And so it doesn't matter what you called anyway. Like, I've never treated a case of cancer in my life, but over the years, I've had a ton of people that have come in that had that diagnosis. I don't care what you call it. What we do is we manage the ecology, and then, people have a much more favorable outcome. So with Lyme's, if you have to wage war and you want an antibiotic effect, here's one of the things you can do that anybody can do. Colloidal silver has been proven very effective with Lyme's. And in fact, one of the better ways, besides taking it orally, which would be good to take a certain amount orally, but you drip it down your sinuses several times a day and let it run, through your sinuses and down the back of your throat. When I had Lyme's, I had a lot of head symptoms, and a lot of Lyme's people will tell you a bed of headaches and double vision and all sorts of weird stuff. And that really kind of kept it at, a less intense level when I did that regularly. Another thing,
real quick, just a question on that. So how do you pronounce it? Spirochetes or
Spirochetes?
Spirochetes. Okay, thanks. Now, where do these live? Are these in the gut, or are these just in your bloodstream? Where's the point to attack them when and you mentioned through the nose and stuff, and I do a colloidal oregano mixture when I get stuff in there. And it works amazingly well. But where does this bacteria live? Is it in the gut, or is it just kind of interspersed throughout the body?
Well, I think they can take up residence anywhere. I don't know the complete answer to that, because I've never seen research that says they have any predilection to any particular system in the body. I know they affect every system of the body, because they're affecting, by way of neurotoxins, neuromuscular junction and in your entire nervous system, so that you get these paralysis symptoms and muscle wasting and that kind of thing. And but when they're circulating, when they're in their alive cycle, when you get the more the prominent symptoms, they're back in your blood system and secreting the neurotoxins into your blood system. So the way you attack them is systemically. You can't just go to a certain part of the body. You have to have a systemic treatment. But if you have head symptoms, like a lot of Lyme sufferers have, if you absorb the colloidal silver through your sinuses, it can have a great effect, on those tissues that are being affected by the neurotoxins locally in that area. The other thing that's extremely effective is oxidative therapies. One of the certifications that I did years back was oxidative therapy, where we learned how to use ozone therapy. Now, ozone is 3 oxygens, like hydrogen peroxide is H2O2. And, by the way, hydrogen peroxide, food grade, is another thing that could be of value with Lyme's people. You can get that at health food stores. You want to do a 3%. They won't sell, they used to sell 30%, but you won't want to take that. You want to dilute it. But they have a 3% solution that they still allow. They'll probably, ban that pretty soon. But if you take oral administration of hydrogen peroxide drops, for instance, about 15 drops of 3% in a glass of water a couple times a day, it can, have a great effect too, and have an antibiotic effect. But even better is O3, which is ozone. The only issue with ozone is you'd have to buy a piece of equipment, and ozone generators are readily available on the internet. There's good ones and so-so ones, but they are more affordable, and some good outfits selling those. If you find a doctor, if you can afford to go to a character like myself that's been certified in ozone therapy, then you can have all different routes of administration. One of the things we do is take out 500 milliliters of blood and, ozonate it, and then drip it back into the body, through ultraviolet light, while it's going back in your body, which further purifies the blood. And you can get treatments like this periodically, which will kind of dope your whole, blood, because it spreads throughout the rest of the, the blood, even though you're only taking out 500 milliliters. And, that's going to have an infinitely greater antibiotic effect with no side effects as compared to antibiotics. And the ozone, what it's going to do is create a great level of oxygenation, because when it hits your bloodstream, the 2 of the oxygens break off as oxygen, and then the third one travels as like a free radical scavenger, and has an effect on breaking down degrading toxins in your body. And actually not a free radical scavenger, forgive me, it's actually this would seem like an oxymoron to some people that are into antioxidants and things, but you want a balance of antioxidants and reducing agents, and that's another whole story. We get a little technical, but the oxygens actually oxidize, and but that can have a beneficial effect if you don't overdo it, because that oxidation will degrade certain organisms and impurities so that your body can get rid of them. So you have that effect, but then mostly you're creating a much higher level of oxygen in your system. And all of these afflictions thrive more in a low oxygen state and are anaerobic. So when you increase oxygen, it's creating an unfavorable ecology where the, spirochetes and, different kind of, other kinds of microbial things that are pathogenic, they can't thrive in that state. So the first thing you want to do is reoxygenate. Now, if you don't go to a doctor and get IVs and all that kind of stuff, what you can do is get an ozone generator yourself, and you can get them for about $500 these days. And you do rectal insufflation. And here's what that means. You take your, anybody that has an ozone generator, you set the flow meter to 2, and you set the regulator to 16, and that would be a good titration. You have to understand ozone is like a medicine. So just like any other medicine, you have to understand dosage, and that would be the dosage you'd want. And you take a catheter, you put it on the tube of the outgoing ozone, and you put it about, 4 or 5 inches up the rectum and put it in there for about 2 minutes. Then you hold the gas for at least 20 minutes to a half hour. It's not hard. And if you did that daily, over time, you would have the same effect as going to a doctor and spending a lot of money with IVs and such. Now, there's next level advancements of ozone therapy beyond the IVs, which are very powerful, that are kind of work like a kidney dialysis, where your blood pumps through and is ozonated and keeps making passes. So, you get a lot more done. But again, those are very expensive, and it requires, a paid professional. So somebody was in the middle of an ongoing condition. It doesn't have to just be Lyme's. It could be, the C word or any other such thing, or neurological disorder. And if it would be worth spending $500 doing daily rectal insufflations. It takes 2 minutes. And if you're regular with it, you're going to have, maybe I would argue, even a better effect, because you're just doing it more gentle and gradual and sustaining it over a long period of time, as opposed to going in with one heroic effort and spending $400 or $500 and then going back next month when you can afford it again.
What about
go ahead, you have something to say?
I was going to say, what about carbon 60?
Well, carbon 60 has a detox effect, which can degrade a lot of the possible byproducts of pathogenic organisms, and the things they secrete, for sure. It's also going to definitely improve your resilience, so that you have a little more wind in your sails when you're trying to fight these things off. So yeah, carbon 60 can be a great adjunctive. Like we spoke about in other podcasts, though, what carbon 60 practitioners and just lay people that use carbon 60 don't take into account is how to maintain a balance. And as we've mentioned, carbon 60 is a very young substance. It works a lot because most people, when they're down and out, are, on the flip side of the coin, energetically. So, they take a young substance and they don't burn out on it. But if you're taking carbon 60, it would be nice to have a little bit more advanced knowledge on how to keep yourself in a state of balance, and not just doing remedies that, like within Chinese medicine, we would call them tonifying, and, need to be balanced out. A good formula, for instance, which we're doing with carbon 60 behind the scenes, would have in a single formula things within the carbon 60 that would also create more of a balance effect for the carbon 60, so you don't even have to worry about it. But carbon 60, would be helpful to most people. And then the way I would approach things is just the way I practice with other people, is every case is individual. So you have to have a way to tune in, even if it's just intuitively, and not look at any one thing like it's going to be the silver bullet and get you over the hump. You have to look at your whole being, and not the least of which you have to pay attention to is your knowledge of your spiritual level, and understand that that's the most scientific thing in the world, and have a practice where you can keep your head straight while you're getting through all this stuff on the ground.
Yeah, I want to get more into that in a second. I just have a couple more questions on the allopathic side. What about like turpentine as a potential way to kill as well? I know it's funny. I kind of played around a little bit with the turpentine and the sugar cubes thing just to see if I had any worm stuff. I know there's been great success. I mean, it's kind of like a classic old school farmer tradition of using turpentine with tapeworm along with castor oil and stuff. I mean, these kind of very old school techniques. Is there much use to them for Lyme, you think, and as far as eradicating stuff, or is this kind of just too homeopathic in a way?
Well, turpentine by itself, I don't have any firsthand experience of seeing people use it for Lymes.
Mm-hmm.
I personally back before I was retired and actually seeing people actively with that kind of stuff. I would do other things that I knew were effective. Turpentine, first to understand, all it is an essential oil. You hear turpentine and you say, oh my God, that's paint thinner. Why would I drink that? Well, you're not drinking it. It's the essence from a tree. And you have to use it judiciously. And a little goes a long way, like a drop on a sugar cube, that kind of thing, administered over time, and that sort of thing. Do your own research. I'm not recommending this to anybody, but I've used it myself. I've used it with my own kids. Growing up in Hawaii, they're running around, and we used to live in Fiji and Hawaii, and and this was in the old days before Hawaii was developed. We're on an outer island, and kids are always getting stuff and exposed to stuff. So yeah, those they grew up with all that sort of thing, and it worked brilliantly. So it's just a natural medicine, and it wasn't just an old wives' tale kind of farmer remedy. This was used by the average naturopath not that long ago. And remember, naturopaths were the doctor of the day before the Rockefeller takeover, and who paved the way with their power and influence over governments, which got there. Oh yeah, I want to see that. Yeah, that's awesome. That was Home Physician. When was copyrighted?
1920.
Oh yeah.
So I believe this is pre-Rockefeller, big pharma. Yeah, 1923. Pacific Press Publishing. I'm really into old books, and I want to dive into this and see how much kind of more naturalistic cures and stuff are in this, because this isn't like a naturopathic in a sense. This is before the term naturopathic. This was just mainstream medicine back then.
As doctor.
Yeah.
Yeah, those are the good ones. Look for those old books. And, fortunately, with a lot of my training, after my conventional training, I, was exposed to a lot of that. And a lot of the training I had was from Europe. And in Europe, because medicine was a seamless tradition from, your Rudolf Steiner kind of people, and all those, just those truths that have been kept alive throughout Europe for centuries, and not just exclusive to Europe, because they incorporated things from all over the world. And you get into the true alchemist. And when I say alchemist, that's real science. And maybe we'll say a word about that before we're through, if we have time. But like Paracelsus and folks that understood how to make real medicines, which we're doing ourselves on site here now. But they understood how to, treat the whole person, how to use medicines in their whole state. And then what they did in Europe, now it's all been shut down, and the average person practicing in Europe is just as dumb as people over here. And that's because for a while, and I was fortunate, I got in that last little window, in the 60s, 70s. And you had that old school tradition where they didn't throw out the baby with the bathwater. And, you had the original microbiologists like Gunther Enderlein and Bouchamp and folks like that, fortunately, their teachings were suppressed, and then they trotted out Louis Pasteur, who is a stooge, paid for stooge that, brought in the whole germ theory kind of nonsense.
The Pasteur versus Bouchamp should be a live stream. That's something I got to write down. We got to do a whole 2-hour deep dive on that, because that's the groundwork for modern medicine.
Yeah,
go ahead.
I agree. So just to finish that off, they back when I was studying, they had contemporary what we would think of as science, but the best of it, that was used to augment and further evolve the old school things, and shed even further insight. Like we had technologies and things that we could use that they didn't have back then. And so we were able to just build. And that's what humanity is about. That's what you call evolution. Evolution isn't a good word. That's a linear concept. It's actually the expansion of our collective consciousness, because evolution does not happen in a straight line. That's another part of that whole Darwin,
Yeah. Reduction.
materialism. So anyway, what I learned was old world integrated with all the best of, contemporary understanding, so that everything just got better and more effective. And turpentine back I think we're talking about
Yeah.
turpentine. That was one of those old remedies back then. I had to think, how the hell did we get here? Turpentine is, been used for centuries. And, again, it's an essential oil. I think it's best probably for larger parasitic kind of organisms. But that's all that I used to use it for, like worms and things like that.
Yeah.
And it worked great.
Makes sense.
I don't know if it would be a go-to for limes or not.
One other question. I am seeing, actually, you can research it on Google. There's tons of turpentine, lime stuff. One other thing too, I always I'm a huge fan of Edgar Cayce, and of course, Lyme is way after Edgar Cayce. But I just still always curious, and because people have been really are always kind of still expanding on his cures and stuff that he was able to channel or dive into the collective consciousness to pull out. And for those who don't know about Edgar Cayce, I mean, he has been proven undoubtedly that he was tapping into some sort of knowledge, because of all the real life cases of people that he who followed what he recommended and were healed of stuff that modern medicine couldn't help them with. But anyways, as an aside, have you heard of the Radiac machine? It's like a 3-carbon system, I believe, discovered by Dr.
No, it's Radiac.
Radiac.
Tell me about it.
Oh, I don't know. I was just curious. This is something that someone was saying they use to finally cure themselves of Lyme, and it's. I was just curious. So I'm not going to get too.
Can
deep.
they tell you anything else about it?
It's a trademark 3-carbon system, charcoal enhanced. And he talks about how, basically, one question, I asked about where these spiral sheets or whatever reside, and they say that he was told that they like to go down to the bones and they hide pretty deep. So
that's why they affect the joints so prevalently, and a lot of people have long-term joint issues after they have Lyme. So yeah, he's absolutely correct, or she.
So he says how he got a Radiac unit, there's and you use it with the solution, and he's actually talking about using it with it looks like a silver. So I thought that if silver injections could kill syphilis spiral sheets, then maybe the vibrations of these solutions could do the same for Lyme spiral sheets. The spiral sheets might try to hide, but they could not escape the solution vibrations that would flow through every part of my body. In mid-March 2004, I got the Vibradex 185 Lyme solution they actually have a solution for Lyme, I guess, from Barre products. And this is actually from the Cayce site. And started the 4-day cycle on my body. And this guy had been afflicted for like a decade. After 2 days into the cycle, I started to feel worse. That was actually good news. I knew from experience that what my doctor had said was true, that spiral sheets die. They produce toxins that make you feel very poorly. We completed the 4-day cycle, and for 2 more days after that, I felt badly. Then I slowly started to feel better. About 2 weeks after the cycle, I decided to repeat it. At that time, I did not get a toxins reaction, so I believe that all this spiral sheets might be dead. To be certain, I repeated the 4-day cycle with a fresh solution, and then essentially in the end, he comes out all good and is finally healed. So something maybe to look into.
Radiac.org, I just found it, and this is a wonderful thing I love about what we're doing here, because and with my clients as well, I still do a lot of consulting. Just had a client flying from Portugal, just left. So I still see people from all over the world, even though I'm retired. I just don't have a clinic. But anyway, you learn new things all the time. And what I always found curious is you go into the average doctor's office, and unfortunately, it's the truth. And you mention something like this, they go, and it's just, garbage. And, if I haven't heard about it, but, a good doctor, you hear something like this, the first thing I do is I research it. And whoever brought this up in the chat, thank you. I'm very curious about this. I'm going to research it. I want to know, a lot of levels. I'll probably end up calling these people and getting technical specs. And, I just want to know how it works. So,
Yeah.
so thanks, because this is the way I keep growing and I keep learning. And, no stone should be left unturned. So I can't remark intelligently about it now, but hopefully next time I'll know
you
more.
go to baar.com.
Yeah, he's the guy
Yeah.
that invented it. Yeah,
And
I just
they've
read
got
that.
Edgar Casey Healthcare and castor oil care and interesting stuff. It sounds like using some of the stuff Edgar Casey had discovered in a new kind of more modern technology. So
Okay, so what's that one again?
baar.com. baar.com.
Are
So
they selling that? Because I don't see any products on the website I'm on.
/
Anyway,
yeah.
let me look into this. We'll both look into it. And there we go. Full spectrum CBD, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean,
awesome.
It's just amazing how much is at our fingertips with me just doing a quick little dive into some of this stuff right when we're doing this chat, what is uncovered. And it's just fascinating that the average individual just immediately when they have something wrong, they make an appointment or they go to a clinic or emergency room or something, and then they're funneled into the pharmaceutical system, which we know is just petrochemical companies profitizing off fossil fuels in a way that both allows them to make more money off the fossil fuels while also creating more sickness and more money through the bloated health system. So without getting...
People have the ability now to fix their own ailments better than ever. A lot of the things that I used to travel around the world, learning, getting in the hip pocket of different doctors and learning from them and everything. Now you can just, go do a couple clicks and find out all about it. And the main thing that people have to learn is how to learn. All this, see, the part of the scam is we've all been taught that, well, unless you're a doctor or an engineer or something, it's way above your head. No, it's not. That's just to keep the priest class intact and to keep you subservient. So my main purpose, even back when I was in my active career days, but especially now, is to teach people how to be their own doctors. One of my heroes, in the past was Albert Schweitzer. Dr. Albert Schweitzer's cool guy, straight MD, but really an awesome guy when you study his life. And he coined the term the inner physician, and which was originally borrowed from Hippocrates. And that's what it's about. A physician is supposed to teach people how to find the healing within themselves. And so, you have everything at your disposal. Don't disempower yourself by running to experts immediately. If there's something really dramatic going on, you might be in over your head and you might need some technologies and assistance. On the other hand, most of the time, you'd be surprised how much you can fix. And each episode you have along that line, you're going to be more empowered the next time until you won't have any health afflictions at all. Another little thing that is interesting, we won't get too deep into it. There was a little gizmo that was created by a gentleman. I won't talk long or much detail about this. It was created and it's very simple. It's just a wall transformer and some silver electrodes. And there's a very precise wire configuration of these 4 prongs. Now this generates silver, but not silver colloids. A regular silver generator has 2 prongs, and what it does is it creates up an electrolysis, so you can make silver solution yourself at home, which is good. It's a good way to have your own pharmacy for less money. although it's kind of a cruder form of colloidal silver, but it'll work. This has 4. And also because of the configuration and the exact voltage that's paired with it, it creates the exact waveform of silver, the way silver would be recognized according to waveform mechanics in nature. That gets into all that stuff, so we'll spare you for that for right now. But if you put this in water, what happens, and you've seen it, Mike,
Yep.
where it turns the water kind of a milky white, and it's actually silver without the colloids. So it's a very high energetic state of silver, not to be confused with homeopathic silver. That's different again. But you're actually getting silver without the possibility of overdoing it and contaminating yourself. Say you have limes for a few years and you are taking a lot of silver because you find it helps, but it's not getting you all the way over the hump. And, after a while, the silver can build up. It would take an inordinate amount, but it is possible. And the way this was developed, you'd have to understand the gentleman that developed this. He was tapped in on another whole level and understood Walter Russell principles and things. And the fact that all the elements on the elemental chart are only distinguished by their configuration in an electrical waveform. And that's what creates that matter that we call silver or any other element that really isn't matter. Again, that gets into the whole simulation business. But this creates the waveform. And he had somebody come to him that was being helped by silver, but he's turning blue. Again, most people, don't worry. You're not going to go to the health food store and get a thing of silver and take some drops and turn blue. Take an extreme amount over a long period of time. However, this guy was doing it, and it has been known to happen with certain people. And he asked this guy, okay, any way you can create, make silver, because this guy was known to be a genius of certain types and, and a serious inventor. And he said, can you make me silver because it helps, but the stuff that won't turn me blue? He says, well, too late. You've already kind of done it to yourself, but I can't create silver that won't turn you blue in the future. And so he worked with just the waveform mechanics, created, he said, well, you need a 4-prong thing. And when you understand the geometry, this would make perfect sense. And I'll stop there. And then the waveform. And so this, and I don't sell these. I'm not affiliated with people that sell these. These are within certain closed circles that are doing a lot of things that would astound the average person out there, as far as the things that are already have been invented and in play and very effective. So this is just one of them. And by the way, this doesn't erode the silver prongs, but the current in conjunction with the silver prongs is what makes it work. But these will last forever, whereas a regular silver generator with the 2 prongs, you have to replace the prongs periodically because you're literally electrolyzing or through electrolysis, imparting the silver ions into the solution. And so the silver actually degrades. This will never degrade because it's not imparting silver ions into the water or colloids of any type. So it's completely non-toxic. You can never get in trouble with it. You drink a whole 8-ounce glass or a quart, whatever, and it works like colloidal silver, only I think better.
So
maybe that will be available someday.
No future potential to join Blue Man Group or something. Turning blue.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd like to see those for sale, but it's not going to happen.
Well,
because they probably go after them. And I don't know,
Yeah, let's
just things like that tend to disappear quick.
Yeah, of course, unfortunately. Well, hopefully we can get past that reality soon, and through decentralization and stuff like crypto and blockchain. But yeah, so just to kind of go full circle on the Lyme, and we'll call it soon. We've been going for over almost an hour and a half. So, yeah, on your personal experience, then, besides the allopathic, attacking the Lyme, then what else? Let's say I'm coming to you and I've discovered I have Lyme disease, and we've obviously known each other a long time, so you kind of know where I'm coming from. And let's say you have my whole background and everything without taking blood samples and stuff. besides the colloidal silver or using that machine and other ways to attack it? What are other things that you did or you recommend then to go kind of to make sure that our immune system and everything is optimized enough to, hopefully eradicate the issue?
Well, for myself, other than colloidal silver to dampen the condition, the intensity, it was more of an internal job. I did take a few rounds of isopathics, which gets into Enderlein's work and understanding the cyclic nature of organisms that live inside of us and how they will go through cyclic changes to do jobs in our body. And that's another whole level of pharmacology I learned in Germany. And, those were available in this country for a while, and they've just been recently eradicated because even a few MDs out there were starting to catch on that, wow, this stuff actually works and even better than antibiotics. And so I did do a few rounds of those, and that was helpful. But ultimately, it was my internal practices. And I'll hold off on that just for a second. Other things that you could do, obviously you want to look at your whole lifestyle. We're all different. So you have to really be able to honestly assess where you're at. If you're eating devitalized food and that sort of thing, then you really need to go to school real quick and understand how to get yourself good, alive, enzyme-rich food. You might want to do things that are going to start flushing your system out, especially your filtration system. A lot of old school remedies that work the best. And you can even go back into the Gospel of the Essenes where Jesus is preaching to the Essenes and telling them how to do these exact things.
Mm-hmm.
How to flush out their lower bowel with certain herbs and things. Interestingly, a lot of this stuff was left out of the Bible. A lot of the real scriptures that have more of a direct connection with, people like Jesus, have all mysteriously been left out, and just, the stuff that gets in there is reinterpreted. And, that's another whole can of worms. But there is a lot of good stuff in scriptures. But, these remedies have been around and proven effective forever. So one really effective one these days that I think everybody on the planet should be doing are coffee enemas. Now, we're all squeamish, especially in the Western world, about, enemas, that's weird. Well, the thing is you go elsewhere in the world and it's just old school. They understand it and they just do it. They get sick, they stop eating, they do enemas, that kind of stuff. But what coffee enemas do is the coffee, different than when you drink it, it's absorbed into your liver directly, bypasses digestion, and it creates a reaction in the liver where the liver dumps all the stuff that's bogging up the filtration system, because the liver's a component in the entire plumbing system, the lymphatics, along with the spleen and all the lymph nodes, that follow all the conduits of lymphatic channels. And so those guys need to be flushed out. Liken it to your, if you have a truck and you're off-roading every day, you're going to have to change the oil filter more often. Now, fact is, these days our bodies are off-roading every single day because of all the contaminations that we are exposed to. These things didn't even exist not that long ago. So if you don't understand, what you're dealing with and what your internal organs are subjected with, you aren't going to know that, your innate healing abilities are being stymied because you can't even flush your own toilet internally because the liver is backed up, the lymphatics are engorged, and now your body has no other recourse but to start, depositing, these things, and walling it off in little tissues and joints and things like that in the body. And then those areas, start fermenting, become anaerobic. And then with time, it necessitates a biological reaction like growing more cells that our brilliant doctors say, oh my God, you have a tumor, when in fact the body's just trying to grow more tissue because every cell is like a little respirator.
Yep.
Are you okay? I just got a little notice. Anyway, every cell brings in oxygen, and the more that you bring in oxygen with the extra cells, it actually turns around to fermentation, could start cleaning up those areas where the body is making deposits, and if you do it right, along with other things we know how to do, the growth actually goes away. It served its purpose. But the way you can prevent that or help yourself prevent those things is to keep yourself cleaned out. Coffee enemas, you should be doing, 1-3 times a week these days. In the old days, I'd say, yeah, when people get sick, it's a good idea, or people with these diagnoses, they should, be doing them regularly until they're out of the woods. So you brew yourself about a pint of organic coffee. We have specialized coffee we use. It's a little different. It's raw, and we complex it with other herbs and things, but just good old-fashioned organic coffee. Let it cool to room temperature, about a pint. You take it up, in an enema, and then you hold it for about 20 minutes, and then let it go. And then your liver just dumps everything. And, this was developed during World War I and II, where the nurses didn't have enough morphine for all the wounded soldiers, and they're in great pain out there. And they found that when, they discovered how to do this, and when they flushed the liver out, it got rid of a lot of the metabolites and, things that create great pain in the body, and it would help manage these people's pain out in the fields. And then, then it was adapted with naturopaths and people after that, and, used for just regular, preventative medicine. So you could be doing that, especially if you have Lyme's. You want to keep everything moving, eat clean, just drink, copious amounts of good alive water. There's a lot of different herbs and things that you could, we could talk about, but every individual is a little bit differently. There's one company, they only sell the physician types, chiropractors and naturopaths and MDs and such. But it's they're in Northern California. It's called Byron White, Byron, last name White, Whit. He's made some really stiff, I've used him very successfully with people, really stiff and intelligent formulations that really work. And he has a whole Lyme's number of products that could be very good. And so if you can't call them up and order yourself, which you can if you're not a doctor type, you can call him up and just say, hey, who do you know in my area that buys your stuff? And, might be a local chiropractor, naturopath. And so that's another good resource. These things really work good. Okay. And, you should be able to get these somehow. Ozone, colloidal silver, H2O2, little round of MSM. Might actually be good in helping you clean up the terrain. And, I know of a lot of other things, but what I'm trying to do off the top of my head is come up with things where the average person could do these things.
Sure. What about CBD?
Yeah, absolutely. CBD could be fantastic. Now, I think CBDs really need to go the next level of manufacturing, because what they've done is they've taken the whole plant and isolated certain things that are very useful, namely the CBDs, but there's all sorts of things that they don't know about. So you need to go to old school spaguricism and make it right.
Yeah.
And I don't know anybody that's doing that with hemp now or cannabis.
Got it.
That's the way, that's another discussion, but that's how we're making our tinctures here.
Yeah.
And
I had a question, and this would be a good refresher real quick for me, is light workers asking how to use MSM. It's been a while since I've done it. It's a 2-solution thing, right?
Yeah, you have to activate it.
Yeah.
And you have activators. Companies will have their own activators. So you activate it and then you drink it. Now, it depends what you're trying to use it for. Like in Africa, when they're eradicating malaria, which of course nobody wants to hear about, but it definitely killed malaria all the time. Then they would do very intensive protocols, or, some kind of parasitic infestation, then off the top of my head, I've got all the formulas. I could go in and get all that, and we can post, formulas. But there's a whole protocol where you go through a certain time period and you take pretty stiff amounts. I don't think that's necessary for the average person. I think for the average person, if you just took a couple drops in water, daily, where it's not going to have any radical effect, it's very gentle, and over time it would have, a good effect. If I had Lyme's, yeah, I might actually think about doing one of those hero programs, where you take large amounts. And, if anybody wants to find out sooner, just go on the internet and you'll find, protocols and dosage recommendations. They're all over the place.
I mean, once I was, when I used to drink and I was DJing one morning, I was at your son's house and I thought it was aloe and I downed a whole bottle of it. Remember, I think.
No.
Yeah. I think we called you. I was all freaking out. And
I might recall that. Actually.
Yeah, that was that was in my younger days. And
so were you?
I'm fine.
Well, I won't say anything. I was just going to ask if maybe you were in an altered state or something, or really how did that happen?
I was just really hungover. Yeah. I was like,
I never did that in my college years, so I don't know.
Okay, well, yeah, I guess we can kind of wrap it up here on the more personal level. So something we always talk about is, and real quick too, on the coffee enema, we do sell, as you briefly mentioned, but I'm, as the more marketer here, we do sell a wonderful formulation of coffee that comes with aloe concentrate and some other herbs and such, which I personally can attest to and use. That one of the reasons why I did quit alcohol is I used to get these horrendous, in the last few years, horrendous hangovers and migraines, really. And one of the only things that would alleviate the symptoms would be doing a coffee enema. It really, really works for that. You feel the caffeine kind of course through you, and then it's just like immediate effect. And something I try to do once a week, even though maybe more now, once a month, just because I've been so busy. But you can go on alfavedic.com and get our coffee cleanse formula. And just to kind of wrap it up finally here, as you were working on yourself with Lyme, you said that you worked internally a little bit. And this is something we talk about a lot. And once you understand wave mechanics and you understand kind of how the simulation works, really all this other stuff, doesn't even totally matter if you can totally master your internal milieu and your internal, energetic spirit body, if you will. So what were some of the things that you did? And we can kind of wrap it up there with that.
Okay. This is something that, it's very personal, and the average person that would ask me this, not that it's over their head or they're not capable, but it's a process to get to a place where these things actually work better than anything. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't mean that you're, special or more evolved than anybody, but it's a process that anybody can get to. So if I were to, talk along these lines, I'm not pretentiously, alluding to great spiritual insight or pretending to be anywhere different than anyone else on the planet. But again, anybody can get there. But if you haven't done the baby steps, then you might need to go back to ground zero and, do some other things to bring yourself along. I just, for whatever reason, through athletic competition that then led to martial arts, then led to internal martial arts, and then hanging out with these people from the old world and different cultures that, really understood how to harness, through their own focus in the mental plane, be able to manipulate their own energy systems and physiology to a certain extent. I had about, 35 years or so experience in that. So by the time I had Lyme's, I had enough, not just practice, but experience of actual results in different areas of my life, where that's where I knew I needed to go. And part of the healing, which we're all in the process of healing ourselves, whether we know it or not. And my healing was that path. And a lot of it was, working through conduits in Europe also with the old Rosicrucian school and the Steiner networks. And I studied with, kind of the heavyweight of the whole Steiner world at that point. And I've told you about him, Mike, the famous composer from Germany who was still living at that time, kind of took me under his wing, and he was a renowned Steiner educator, and we became close friends. And so, Steiner just, not just Steiner, many, that whole school, but I just use him because he's a recognizable name. And, he put science in, in its proper context, that it's not separate from consciousness, and help people that understand that it is our consciousness that is in charge all the time, whether we know it or not. And then the martial arts were nothing more than from another culture, developing practices to use not just body movements but internal techniques to move your energy. Like anybody can train themselves to move their energy in their body, where you can adjust your own spine. I mean, you literally hear things adjust audibly. You can move energy to different energy spots when you have to do something that, where your energy there would be helpful. Or if you're going into your solar plexus, into fear and fight, flight, and all that kind of thing, if you understand how to just physically manipulate your energy into your heart center, which is your most intelligent mind, then it's literally like a furnace that will burn up those fears and just those kind of egoic reactions, no matter what drama you find yourself in the middle of, so that, you can, transcend and then also not do that to your chemistry, where, most people are just, it's one dramatic event after another, and their chemistry is just, an accident waiting to happen for every disease in the book. So anyway, I had enough experience, and then, having a whole lifetime in the healing arts, that helps. And, that old saying, you teach what you need to learn most. I believe that was especially true in my experience. I needed, I think I'm a slow learner, and I needed to see literally thousands of people going through their process and facilitating that process, so that I once and for all just had my belief system changed, all the doubts and everything that one might entertain, like, wow, does it really work that way? Well, I have no doubt anymore, because I've overseen many people, literally thousands, go through that process, come out the other end. And so that was my education. And so that, coupled with the other arts, when I got contracted Lyme's, I knew that's where I had to go. So that's why I didn't, I have, people in the business, friends, and, that, like, one guy in particular is from Germany. He's considered the Lyme's expert of the world, that kind of thing. I could have easily just run up there to him but I knew that wasn't my path. Not that that wouldn't be helpful, but it wasn't my path. So above all, you have to honor where you're at, have to intelligently assess where you're at, and treat yourself where you're at. That's where I was at. So I had internal practices that I literally sat with, especially the last 6 months, when I realized, okay, I'm used to, as an old jock, just, ignore it and it'll go away kind of thing, and tough it out. Well, it wasn't going away. So the last 6 months, I said, okay, I've got to get on my A game here. And I did that. And so I, for a good few hour block of time every day, I just sat still with myself. And as best as I was able to do, kind of healed that separation that we all perceive between ourselves and I'll just call it the electronic body, which we all have hanging out right over our head, whether we believe it or not, which is the stream of energy that keeps us in the simulation every single moment. If it wasn't for that electronic body, which is our true self, when it perceives that you are not gaining any more wisdom or soul expansion within the simulation, then it's only a matter of time before that energy is withdrawn. And then that's what we call the death experience. Well, it doesn't have to be when you have, taken steps to really perceive yourself as one and the same, and that all power comes from there. And, like that's where some of and I'm not getting all religious because I'm not a religious person. Spiritual and religious, I think, are two different things. But, in the scriptures, like, for instance, Jesus would say, without the Father, I am nothing. I mean, he said that. And with that, he was referring to exactly that. I am means, that electronic body. And when you say I am, then you are not perceiving yourself here as the real deal. This is just a projection. And without the energy coming through, that projection would literally evaporate in a moment and you just go bye-bye. So the healing is really unifying yourself with who you really are. And with the internal practices, not saying I'm there by a long shot or whatever, but I was able to, in those moments, create that unity to an extent where I would have periods where, and my symptoms were dramatic, but all of a sudden I would get conscious because I'd realize I don't have any symptoms. But an interesting thing happened. As soon as I thought, and I was elated, like the symptoms are gone, they come back. Mm-hmm. So, again, I'm a slow learner, but finally what dawned on me is that just the mere, for me, what I, needed for my own experience, just the mere recognition of symptoms brought me back into the matrix, into the illusion. And there I was again. So I had to, you can't struggle, but it was a struggle. But, when you're there, it's not a struggle. It's actually a luxury. But I would get in those moments where not only would things abate, but also I just, obviously intellectually, you're going to be aware of what you're going through and you're not memory of it. But in your emotional body, you're no longer excited like, oh, is it gone? I don't feel it. You just kind of keep that center no matter what you're experiencing, whether you project it as good or bad. You just have to keep that center and the connection from your electronic body to that center. And when I did that long enough, built up the momentum enough, which was a fantastic experience because it got me to another level in my process. It's never left me. Then it went away.
And
that probably sounds like gobbledygook to some people, but that was my experience.
So were you using like visualization tactics or techniques too, where you were kind of meditating?
Yes.
And yeah. And, I've used such techniques with my kids when one of them had a high fever. And I laid with him at night, chest to chest, and literally kind of meditated into his fever. And this sounds crazy too. And I kind of visualized his fever going into me and me dispersing it. And within an hour, his fever broke. So crazy stuff. But when
you're working with other people, rather than taking it on at all on yourself, because I learned that in the early days, being a practitioner, you'd be going along. I see 30 people every single day, back in the clinic days. And, we had a whole staff, so I could accommodate that and give good quality care. But, you just see wonderful people have great experience. And then you get that one person through no fault of their own, but some people are a little bit more adept at getting their tentacles in you, and then that one person you take home, and it would be devastating. So you learn right away how to, protect yourself from that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And even if you're with a loved one, you don't want to take on their energy. So there's a way where you can go from your electronic body to their electronic body and work from there, so that it's bypasses you entirely. And that actually it's more effective.
Interesting.
And, then you get used to it at the same time. And I found out after years of practice, I could go into work feeling maybe on any particular day, maybe a little less energetic than on any given day. And at the end of work, I'd be more energized every single time.
Mm-hmm.
And to this day, if I ever, work with somebody at the end of the session, I'm more energized, because you just learn how not to give your energy away, make yourself a conduit. And when you are a conduit, you get pumped as well. And so, a whole different ball game.
Fascinating. Well, cool. I think that leaves it open for future conversations going more into the inner work and the inner ability to heal and to, kind of deal with these more physical issues. It does. This is what poetry is, right? Trying to describe these things. It gets difficult. So,
And like they say, as soon as you try to name it, it doesn't work anymore, because go back to our earlier discussion of corporations being fictions. Anything you put words on becomes a fiction. That's why in the old alchemical schools, which was real science, if you understand what they're really up to, they used a lot of symbology, because that would create engrams within the mental plane that were universal and very effective, without creating the confusion and partitions that words create, that bring you right back into the matrix. So there's a reason why indigenous languages were all bastardized and given past and future tense and all these things that they didn't originally have, or why indigenous people, when they became conquered, were not even allowed to speak their mother tongue. And so language is a weapon, and no more so than in our present culture in the English language. The English language is very powerful and has some positive qualities, but at the same time, it's probably been weaponized more than any other.
Yeah, I know the introduction of the phonetic languages back in the day, and this goes to like the Tower of Babel and stuff, was an intentional way to maintain the matrix control. And like the idea of Latin, which is the basis for most Western languages, like no one even knows what Latin means, which is kind of funny. I mean, everyone in English and French and German, etc., we know the Latin base for most words and where we get the meaning, but we actually don't know where the actual word Latin comes from or where it derived from. It's fascinating stuff. Language is crazy. The fact that how we think, right? We think in phonetic words in our mind. We lost the ability in many ways to think in symbols. Yeah, we can go, God, that's a super interesting long conversation we could have down the line, but I think we're good. I think we touched on a lot. Hopefully we've helped some that unfortunately might be dealing with Lyme's or have a loved one dealing with Lyme. Hopefully we gave some just really practical advice and also opened up other channels of thought into how we can deal with these afflictions beyond just the physical. And this also relates to things like cancer and other maladies that can affect us. And that's something, another topic I want to dive more into down the line is cancer, the big C word. So that'll be another future one we'll go more into. Any parting words for those that have stuck with us? We've had people on the live stream this whole time. We appreciate everybody who's been involved with the chat and listening. It's been a good one, I think. Any parting words, Dr. Lando?
Yeah, the only thing I'd say is anybody with Lyme's or have a loved one with Lyme's, don't give up hope, because again, I saw many, many cases over the years, and I can't think of one person that didn't get better. Again, not because of me, but because we do know how to work with the body and understand things that aren't taught in conventional schooling. And it's just a matter of getting out of your own way. And it's tough, and it's really hard to, for instance, what I was just sharing my personal journey. It's real hard to get in a real deep meditative state, when your head's pounding and and you feel sicker than a dog. And so I don't ever, when we're talking like this and we're talking about everybody can heal themselves, and we all not only have that ability, but we all participated in getting ourselves. I wasn't a victim of a mosquito bite. Everything in our experience is purposeful. And so it's not like somebody did it to me. That was an experience that my soul needed along the way for my personal journey. And when you understand, getting into Walter Russell, that sort of thing, you understand there's no coincidences, there's no victims. But sometimes I'll get a little feedback where people that are sick or know people that are sick say, that's kind of mean, saying, you created this. Well, no, we're not saying you created this, or you're bad for having it, or you've got bad karma or something, or not having empathy for people that don't feel well. But when you understand the creative principles and your role in the universe and your purpose for embodying in the first place, not only will all the solutions for all your problems appear, and all the people to assist you will magically appear with them, but that it's much more empowering to understand these principles and feel like you're a victim. And even when you're on the ropes, like I was during this period, it doesn't help you get better to think that you're, a victim of something. All it is spirit saying it's time to up your game. You're ready to graduate to the next level. So use this purposefully, and don't believe all the garbage you hear through medical circles that say, that you have to get on immediate, antibiotic drip, or listen to your neighbor that says, oh, you can't heal that. I've had it my whole life. And just don't buy it, because you can get better, and you can get better very quick, even on your own. And there's practitioners out there that will help you if you feel like you really need help.
Yeah, in the end, anything's possible in this world. Anything. So if you truly,
Everything.
yes, everything and anything. Well, awesome. Great talk. Thanks to everybody for joining us today. Please join our community on Telegram. We're trying to grow that. That's where we're most active, actually. That's t.me/Alfa Vedic, ALFAVEDIC. Telegram's a great app you can throw right on your phone. It's a great way to stay in contact with others, and something that we really like. Of course, we're on the more traditional platforms as well: Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. We're also on a great new platform called Scent. Everything's Alfa Vedic, ALFAVEDIC. You go to alfavedic.com. We have a number of really cool products that we develop that are in line with our philosophy, health-related products, as well as media and other content on there. So thanks again. You can subscribe to our newsletter by going to our website, and to get notifications when we do our live streams and podcasts and stuff. In the future, we'll be definitely engaging with special guests on these live streams, people from all different walks of life that are specialists or have a unique life experience in different arenas. So we're only just going to keep growing this as we build towards a larger community and launching the co-op, which will be a way for individuals to have more direct access to Dr. Lando, myself, and our team, as well as get discounts on products, and just evolve the community into a more holistic kind of together vibe, if you will. So thanks again, everybody, for joining us today. Thanks, Dr. Lando. Appreciate your personal story there and your time today. And have fun out in the garden. Cheers. Peace.